My name is Ethan Callaway, and if you're hearing this, it means I managed to keep the transmitter alive one more night. I'm broadcasting from the old radio tower on Thornfield Ridge, frequency 97.3. Don't waste time wondering who I am or why I'm speaking into dead air. Just listen. If you're anywhere near these mountains, turn back. Leave now before leaving. Just comment below from where you're listening now, and subscribe to Eclipse Horror Stories. What's waiting here is not something you can fight with courage or firepower. I swear to you, every word I say is the truth. 3 nights ago, I was still a park ranger who believed monsters belonged in stories told around campfires. I'd walked these woods since I was a boy, knew the ridges and streams better than the streets of my own hometown. Back then, the only dangers I expected were broken ankles, angry bears, or storms rolling down from Black Creek Falls. But everything changed the night Marcus Denver, my partner of 6 years, didn't come back from patrol. Marcus was dependable, a man who never missed check-in. When his radio stayed quiet, I thought maybe he'd slipped into one of the ravines and broken a leg. I hiked out at sunrise with 2 deputies and found him beneath the old stone bridge. I'll never forget the sight. His uniform was ripped open like he'd been dragged through barbed wire. His chest marked with wounds too deep, too deliberate to be random. They weren't claw marks, not like any animal I'd studied. It was as if someone, or something, had tried to rip him apart with bare hands. Marcus was still alive, but barely. His lips were cracked, his voice raw from whispering one phrase over and over. Yellow eyes. He said they glowed like lanterns in the dark, watching him from the tree line, while he tried to check the campsites at Devil's Backbone. He swore it walked upright like a man, but circled him with the patience of a hunter. Before it struck, it spoke his name in a voice that was almost human, almost. That was enough to drain the color from every face standing under that bridge. We rushed him to the county hospital. The doctors thought it was some kind of animal attack, maybe a mountain lion, though none of them could explain the wounds. They hooked him up to IVs, cleaned the cuts, did their best. But as the sun went down, I noticed things they didn't. His fingernails were growing, too fast, too sharp. His body twitched with spasms, so violent the steel bed frame shuddered like it might snap. Around midnight, under October's full moon, the change began. I stood there helpless as Marcus' body broke itself apart to build something new. His teeth dropped one by one, blood filling his mouth, only for fangs to push through the gums like ivory spikes. His limbs stretched, bones cracking in ways no human should survive, shoulders broadening until the restraints cut into his skin. Dark hair sprouted across his arms, chest, and face as if the forest itself was forcing its way through his pores. The sound he made wasn't human, not animal either. It was a howl twisted with pain and hunger. Then his eyes opened, not brown anymore, but glowing yellow, burning from within like fire trapped in glass. The moment he met my gaze, I knew Marcus was gone. The restraints snapped like they were paper. He leapt from the bed, claws digging into the ceiling tiles before he dropped down behind me with a silence that didn't belong in any hospital. I barely had time to throw myself through the nearest window. Glass shredded my arms as I tumbled out into the night. Behind me, his growls rolled through the corridors, followed by screams that echoed through every floor. By dawn, 3 staff members had vanished. All that remained were uniforms soaked in blood, dropped like empty skins. The sheriff filed it as a gas leak, equipment failure, a tragedy. That was easier than believing the truth. But I knew better. I knew Marcus was out there, running through the woods with his new body, learning what it could do, hunting for something human enough to recognize, but not enough to spare. When I went back into the forest, I started finding signs. Deer torn apart, not eaten clean like a predator would, but ripped into pieces and arranged in patterns I couldn't understand. Trees carved with gouges so deep they split into the heartwood. Not random scratches, marks. Territory. Messages. People in town began whispering about strange things. Voices calling their names in the dark. Voices that sounded like family members who'd been dead for years. Campers said glowing eyes circled their tents, just out of reach of the firelight. Farmers woke to find their barns empty, locks ripped open from the inside. I wanted to think Marcus was just one case, one accident. But with each day, more people disappeared. Each full moon, more survivors showed the same symptoms he had. Strange hunger, sharper senses, dreams of running on all fours. I began to understand. It wasn't just Marcus. It was spreading. That's why I'm here on this ridge with a dying radio, talking to anyone who might still believe me. Because if you don't, if you set foot on these mountains when the moon is full, you won't walk back down again. And as I speak, I can see them moving below the tree-leaned. Not lanterns, not flashlights. Yellow eyes, waiting, listening, hunting. They're down there, just beyond the pines, their eyes catching the moonlight like a row of cold lanterns. I know better than to climb down and run. They'd cut me off before I made it 100 yards. That's how they hunt, circling, closing in slow, letting the fear ripen before they strike. I stay at the transmitter because speaking into this mic feels like the only thing keeping me human. As long as I can tell this story, I haven't joined them. Not yet. After Marcus' first transformation, I told myself it might be contained. Maybe the curse needed the full moon. Maybe it wouldn't spread beyond him. A week later, I had my answer. Reports came in from all over Thornfield County. A hiker vanished near Black Hollow. A camper's screams carried across Cedar Lake until they broke into something that wasn't human anymore. Families found claw marks carved into their front doors, deep grooves that no knife or tool could have made. I tried to keep track, writing names in a notebook. At first, just 3 cases, then 8, then more than I could count. They weren't dying, they were changing. It was Marcus Hospital night, replayed in different houses, different barns, different campsites. The sheriff ignored the signs, called it animal attacks, even blamed rabid dogs. But I'd seen Marcus' eyes when the restraint snapped. I knew this wasn't rabies. It was older, hungrier. I stayed close to the woods, listening, gathering evidence. I found deer carcasses torn apart, placed in perfect circles like warnings. I found clothing in the dirt, ripped but arranged neatly, as though someone wanted it discovered. I heard voices calling my name when I knew I was alone. Sometimes they used Marcus' tone, other times my grandfather's. Each time I turned toward the sound, I swore I saw yellow eyes flicker just before fading back into the dark. It wasn't only Marcus anymore. He had become something worse than a wild beast. He remembered just enough of his humanity to twist it into a weapon. He knew where people lived, how they thought, and he used that knowledge to lure them out. A neighbor of mine, Mrs. Carpenter, got a call at midnight. She swore it was her husband's voice, even though he'd been buried 3 years. By dawn, her house was empty. Every new attack meant another infection. The wounds weren't just deadly, they were contagious. A single bite was enough to carry the curse. By the next full moon, those bitten would twist and break into the same yellow-eyed monsters. And so the pack grew. I started searching for answers in old places. My grandfather had been born in Eastern Europe before moving here. When I was a boy, he'd tell me stories about cursed wolves that rose under the full moon. Back then, I'd laugh them off, the way kids do when old men try to scare them. But he'd left behind a box of journals in our attic, pages full of warnings in his heavy handwriting. He wrote about villages that vanished overnight, about silver being the only thing that could pierce the cursed flesh. He even described how werewolves would use the voices of loved ones, how they circled their prey, how they played with fear. It was all there, waiting for me to read it again with grown-up eyes. I wanted to believe Silver was just superstition, but everything else he'd written had already come true. So I began searching houses, churches, and pawn shops, pocketing whatever scraps of silver I could find. Rings, spoons, crosses, anything that could be melted down. It was the first time I felt like I had a chance. Though even then I wasn't sure how much longer I'd stay human. Because here's the part one haven't admitted yet. I'd been scratched. Not deep, not like Marcus, but enough to burn when the moon rose high. At first I thought it was just an old scar reopening, but then I felt it. Hunger, sharp and constant, no matter how much I ate. At night I dreamed of running, not on 2 legs but 4, chasing shadows through the trees. I'd wake with mud on my shoes and twigs tangled in my hair, though I hadn't left my cabin. I told myself I still had time, that the change wasn't certain, but deep down, I knew it was already inside me. The last straw came when Sheriff Langston and his deputies tried to fight. They armed themselves with rifles and hollow-point rounds, convinced that more bullets meant more power. I heard the call go out over the radio when they cornered one of the creatures in Miller's barn. I drove out there, thinking maybe they had a chance. When I arrived, I found nothing but silence and a patrol car torn open like a tin can. Later, I found the sheriff's radio in the dirt, still pressed to transmit. His last words played on repeat. I shot it point blank. It's healing. It's looking at me. Then screams. Then static. I carry that sound with me every time I close my eyes. That's when I stopped waiting for help. There would be no cavalry, no federal rescue, no military convoy. Only me, a broken radio tower, and whatever silver I could scrape together. Now, as I sit here speaking into this microphone, I hear them moving closer through the trees. The yellow eyes don't blink. They know I'm still human enough to resist. They're waiting for the hunger to take over, waiting for me to join them willingly. But I'm not ready to give in. Not yet. If you're out there, if you're listening, remember this. Every full moon adds to their numbers. Every bite means another hunter in the pack. And the more they grow, the closer they come to wiping out everything you think is safe. I can't stop them alone. But maybe if someone hears this, someone braver or smarter than me, they'll know what to do. Because soon, it won't just be Thornfield County. It'll be everywhere. I wasn't the only one who knew the truth. Word spread quietly through the county, whispered in diners and hardware stores before people fell silent whenever strangers walked in. Fear made everyone cautious, but fear also made them reckless. Farmers sat up with shotguns on their porches, certain they could defend their land. Families locked themselves inside basements, convinced concrete and steel could keep the monsters out. None of them understood that these things weren't just animals. They were learning. They remembered just enough from their human lives to know exactly how to tear us apart. I learned that the hard way when I drove out to St. Catherine's Church one night. Father Michael had gathered a group of survivors there, families who believed holy ground would keep them safe. I wanted to believe it too, but I'd already seen how silver was the only thing that made a difference. Still, I carried a pistol loaded with the few silver rounds I'd managed to make from melted jewelry, just in case. For 3 nights, the church held. People prayed together, sang hymns, lit candles under the stained glass windows. Outside, the wolves circled. I could hear their howls echoing across the valley, calling and answering each other like some kind of choir from hell. The families inside pressed closer to the walls, whispering prayers, clinging to hope. On the 4th night, the moon rose fat and white, and hope wasn't enough. They came through the windows. The glass shattered, and their shadows poured in like a flood. I saw their silhouettes framed in colored light, wolves shaped like men, their eyes blazing, their claws cutting through saints and angels as if the artwork itself was mocking them. Father Michael stood at the altar, silver cross raised, chanting in Latin as if the words could keep them back. For heartbeat, I thought maybe it would. The creatures hesitated, snarling, pacing. But then one of them lunged, and the others followed. The screams drowned out the prayers. The pews overturned as people scrambled for the exits, but the beasts were faster. I fired 2 silver rounds and watched one of them collapse, its flesh burning where the bullet struck. It was the first time I knew for sure silver worked. But 2 bullets weren't enough. The church became a slaughterhouse. When it was over, the candles had burned down to puddles of wax, the air thick with smoke and blood. I stumbled through the wreckage at dawn, my ears ringing with silence where there should have been voices. Father Michael's cross lay twisted and blackened on the floor, the silver tarnished where it had touched the creatures. It had burned them, yes, but it hadn't saved him. His robes were shredded, scattered across the altar like an offering. That's when I understood. These weren't mindless beasts. They weren't just hunting. They were mocking us, breaking us down piece by piece. It got worse. Survivors who had been bitten started to turn faster, as if the curse was speeding up. Some of them didn't even last until the next full moon. Their eyes went yellow within days, their nails sharp, their hunger unbearable. It was spreading like wildfire. I drove to my brother Miles' cabin one night, hoping he'd be safe. He met me at the door, pale and shaking, his shoulder bandaged. He didn't even need to say it. I saw the way he held himself, the way his eyes kept darting toward the moon. He'd been bitten. He begged me to end it before the change came. Said he couldn't do it himself. I wanted to. God knows I did, but I couldn't raise the gun. He was my brother. He taught me how to fish, how to fix a truck, how to get through our father's temper. I left him there, promising I'd find a way. But the truth is, I was too much of a coward. I never saw him again. The pack grew bolder with each night. They didn't just pick off stragglers anymore. They began staging attacks with strategy. Some would draw people out with voices that sounded like children crying. Others would smash through the front of a house, while the rest slipped in through the back. They hunted in formation, the way soldiers moved in a war zone. The sheriff's deputies were gone. The church was gone. Families were vanishing by the dozen. And then I heard the most terrifying thing yet, the new alpha. It started as a rumor. People whispered about a priest who'd been bitten while performing last rites. They said his faith hadn't saved him. It had twisted him. His name was Father Grant Holloway. I'd known him my whole life, seen him baptize babies, bury old men, bless meals at town gatherings. Now his voice carried over the hills, warped but still recognizable. He called to the others, and they listened. The howls became sermons, rising and falling like dark gospels. The pack gathered around him, no longer just scattered monsters, but an army with a leader. Survivors said his eyes glowed brighter than the rest, his body taller, stronger, and worst of all, he still spoke with the cadence of a priest, but his words were poison. He turned every fragment of faith into something foul, twisting prayers into commands. That night, I heard him calling names from the valley below, the names of people who had already died. He said them in the same soft tone he used at funerals, and the pack howled in answer. Families hiding in their homes cracked their doors open, tears in their eyes, because they thought they'd heard loved ones calling. By dawn, those families were gone. Grant wasn't just another werewolf. He was organizing them, binding them together with something more than hunger. And if he kept growing his pack this way, we wouldn't just lose Thornfield. We'd lose everything. The night after I first heard Grant's voice echoing through the valley, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my cabin with the silver bullets I'd managed to make, lining them up on the table like they were enough to stop an army. Outside, the howls rolled through the hills in waves, layered and organized. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was music, horrible, steady music. They were learning to move as one. By the third night, it was undeniable. Survivors who managed to reach me described attacks that didn't feel like wild hunts at all. Packs would approach from opposite sides of a farmhouse, using one group to drive the family out the back where the others were waiting. In one case, they dug under the foundation, coming up through the basement while the front doors stayed locked. They weren't improvising. They were planning. And always, in the center of it, was Grant. I saw him once with my own eyes. It was near the Miller farmhouse, where 3 families had tried to turn the place into a fortress. They had welded steel plates across the windows, reinforced the doors, stockpiled food and ammunition. It should have been safe. But nothing is safe when the enemy is stronger than any human wall. I crouched in the woods, too far to help but too close to turn away. The pack surrounded the farmhouse, dozens of yellow eyes gleaming in the night. And then I heard it, Grant's voice, calling each family member's name. He spoke like he was leading Sunday service, calm, clear, certain. The names of their dead children, their parents, their husbands and wives. The people inside began to weep. Some shouted back, begging him to stop. Some pressed their heads against the walls, like they could get closer to the voices. One by one, the doors opened. The pack didn't even rush in. They waited. They wanted the families to step outside willingly, to choose their own doom. And they did. I saw them dragged into the yard, torn apart beneath the moon, while Grant stood over it all, his body towering, his eyes brighter than fire. He didn't even need to move. His voice was enough to do the killing. When the last scream faded, he raised his head and howled, and every beast around him answered like a congregation. I wanted to shoot him then, to raise my rifle and put one silver bullet through his heart, but I didn't. My hand was shaking too hard, and deep down, I knew I'd only get one shot. If I missed, they'd tear me to pieces before I even reloaded. So I stayed in the shadows, teeth clenched, hating myself for watching and doing nothing. That night, I felt the wound on my arm burn hotter than it ever had before. It pulsed with the rhythm of their howls, like it was alive, like it was listening. I clenched my fists until my nails cut into my palms, whispering to myself that I was still human. But the truth was clawing its way into my blood. I could feel it. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I even tell? The sheriff was gone. Father Michael was gone. My brother was gone. The county had become a graveyard, and I was one of the last people left breathing. But the curse doesn't care about breathing. A week later, I met a man named Dylan Mercer, a machinist who'd stayed behind when his family fled. He'd been melting down coins and jewelry in his garage, trying to make silver bullets. He showed me his molds, rough little casts shaped out of soap bars. His bullets weren't perfect, but they were something. I saw the same desperation in his eyes that I felt in mine. That night, the pack came for him. I found his garage door ripped in half, claw marks bending the metal like it was soft clay. Dylan's body was gone, but his workshop was littered with half-finished bullets. The pack had left them scattered, tarnished black where their flesh had touched the silver. They weren't just hunting him. They knew what he was making. They understood it was dangerous, and they destroyed it. That's when I realized they weren't just strong. They were smart, smarter than us, in ways that turned every defense into nothing. I loaded what little I salvaged from Dylan's shop into my own rifle. It wasn't much, 10 rounds, maybe 12. But each one gave me a sliver of hope, a fragile, dangerous hope. And yet, every time the hunger clawed at me, every time the wound on my arm burned with the pull of the moon, I wondered if I'd ever use those bullets on someone else, or on myself, because the dreams were getting worse, running through the trees on legs that weren't mine. tasting blood in my mouth that I couldn't explain, waking up with my heart racing, the sound of howls echoing in my ears like I had joined them already. The line between me and them was getting thinner every night. And then, one evening, I heard Grant's voice again. Not in the valley this time, not outside a farmhouse. Inside my own head. He spoke my name in that same soft cadence, promising I didn't have to fight anymore. Promising I could join the pack and never feel alone again. I sat in the dark, gun across my lap, trembling as his words filled the silence of my cabin. I wanted to believe I could resist, but part of me already knew the truth. The pack wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside me. I tried to drown out his voice, but silence made it worse. The moment I turned off the radio, I'd hear him whispering in my head again, calm and patient, like a teacher waiting for me to finally admit the answer was obvious. Sleep brought no escape either. In dreams, I wasn't Ethan Callaway anymore. I was something larger, faster, hungrier. Running through the woods on 4 legs felt natural. The scent of blood on the wind made my chest tighten with joy. When I woke, my hands would ache as if I'd spent hours clawing through dirt and bark. I knew the curse was inside me, and yet I couldn't bring myself to end it. Not while I still had a chance to fight. But out there, the fight was being lost. The pack had stopped attacking at random. They were coordinated now, moving like soldiers under Grant's command. Survivors whispered about the hunts, organized assaults that started with howls echoing across whole neighborhoods. The sound would shake windows, make dogs go silent, drive people into basements where they thought they were safe. Then the attacks would begin. I saw one of those hunts with my own eyes. The school had become a shelter for 50 people. Families had boarded up the windows, dragged desks and cabinets against the doors. From the outside, it looked like a fortress, but the pack didn't rush it. They circled the building all night, howling nursery rhymes and voices that bent between human and animal. Ring around the rosy. They sang in tones that cracked the glass. Children inside screamed while their parents pressed hands against their ears. Then, as the moon reached its highest, they scratched words into the brick walls with claws sharp enough to carve stone. The phrases made no sense to me, but the families inside understood. They were the names of their lost ones, etched deep enough to weaken the walls. By morning, the school was silent. When I walked through later, the hallways reeked of blood, and the walls were painted with messages I couldn't read. This wasn't just survival for them anymore. It was ritual, a game. Some survivors who escaped told me the beasts arranged bodies in patterns, circles and crosses, as if mocking human faith. And every time, Grant's voice carried through the night, turning horror into ceremony. I thought about Father Michael then, about the silver cross he'd held high, how the beasts had knocked it from his hands, leaving it blackened and twisted. That memory gnawed at me, but it also reminded me of something. Silver worked. Even if only for a moment, it worked. So I began to gather more. I broke into the old Lutheran church and stole their communion set, melting chalices into rough bullet molds. I raided abandoned houses for wedding rings, coins, even old heirlooms that had been passed down through generations. Every piece I touched burned cold in my hands, like it knew what it was meant for. But the pack knew, too. Every time I worked with silver, I felt eyes on me. They lingered at the edge of the woods, circling, growling low enough to rattle the windows. They feared it, but they also wanted to destroy it before I finished. Twice, I had to grab my rifle and fire into the trees, just to remind them I was still dangerous. Both times, I hit nothing but shadows. And still, the curse inside me grew stronger. My appetite was bottomless, my senses sharper. I could hear every heartbeat within a mile, smell the fear of survivors hidden in storm cellars. I knew where they were even when I didn't want to. I'd close my eyes and picture them huddled together, whispering prayers while their terror rolled off them like smoke. It sickened me, but also thrilled me. One night, I got a radio call from my brother Miles. His voice cracked through static, begging me to find him. He said the bite on his shoulder was burning like fire, that he was losing himself to the hunger. He wanted me to put an end to it before he hurt anyone else. But I was already too far gone to do it. I couldn't kill my own brother. I couldn't even save him. The transmission cut out, and I knew he was gone. Grant's voice haunted me worse after that. It spoke of family, of unity, of freedom from guilt. He said the pack didn't mourn, they celebrated. He promised I would never feel alone again. And deep down, a part of me believed him. But another part remembered the screams at St. Catherine's, the Miller farmhouse, the school. I remembered the sheriff's last call, the way he'd begged for help before static swallowed him whole. I remembered the weight of my grandfather's journals, his stories of villages wiped clean in one night. The line between human and monster had never felt thinner. That's when I made my choice. If I couldn't stop the curse inside me, maybe I could still use it. Maybe I could hold on long enough to put a silver bullet through Grant's heart, because if he fell, maybe the rest would crumble with him. I carried that thought with me like a lifeline. If I couldn't stop what was happening to me, maybe I could still take Grant down before the change claimed the last piece of my humanity. It was the only plan that made sense, though calling it a plan felt generous. It was more like a desperate prayer muttered into the dark. But the dark didn't care. The pack was growing bolder every night. Their howls weren't random anymore. They rose and fell in perfect harmony, carrying across the valleys like signals. Survivors swore they heard instructions in the cries, like orders shouted in a language older than words. Farms were hit at the same time as homes miles away. Barns collapsed while doors splintered in other towns. It wasn't chaos, it was strategy. I confirmed it myself when I tracked them one evening to the old mine shafts west of Thornfield. The shafts had been abandoned for decades, but now they were alive again with sounds that didn't belong underground. I crept close enough to hear the echoes, not just howls, but voices, half human, half animal. They weren't fighting, they were planning, and I saw prisoners down there. People chained like livestock, trembling in the dark. The wolves didn't kill them right away. They kept them alive until the full moon, feeding them scraps of raw meat, waiting for the change to come. When it did, the pack would welcome them with sick joy, dragging them into the fold. It wasn't just infection anymore. It was breeding. I barely escaped. One of them caught my scent, and for a moment I thought it was over. But instead of tearing me apart, it circled back, sniffing, snarling, eyes locked on the scar on my arm. It knew. It could smell the curse in me. The only reason I lived was because it believed I was already theirs. That night, the hunger inside me became unbearable. I tore into canned food like it was nothing. But no matter how much I ate, it didn't help. My stomach was an empty pit, gnawing at me from the inside. And then the craving changed. I wanted meat raw, warm, bloody. I could almost taste it just thinking about it. I smashed my fists against the wall until they bled, just to remind myself pain still meant something human. But when I licked the blood from my knuckles, I didn't spit it out. I swallowed, and the shame nearly broke me. The next evening, Grant's voice found me again. Not in the woods, not on the wind, inside my skull. He spoke like he was standing right beside me, soft and certain, promising relief. He told me the hunger would fade if I let go. That fighting was pointless, that I could use the power instead of fearing it. I screamed at him to shut up, but the words felt weak even in my own mouth. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't just infected. I was connected. The curse wasn't just changing my body. It was linking me to them. I could feel the pack through that bond, sense their movements, their laughter, their hunger. I knew where they were even without seeing them, and if I could feel them, then maybe I could fool them too. It was a dangerous idea, the kind that could get me killed faster than any bite, but it was all I had. I would let the connection grow just enough to trick them into thinking I was part of them. If they believed I'd surrendered, maybe they'd let me close to Grant, close enough to aim one silver round into his heart. I started practicing. When I felt their howls rise through the bond, I howled back under my breath. When I sensed their hunger, I let mine swell until it matched. At first, it made me sick, but the longer I did it, the easier it became. Too easy. Some nights, I caught myself smiling at the thought of running with them. That terrified me more than anything. Still, I held to the mission. Silver. One bullet. Grant's heart. I raided Ryan Chandler's old mill where he'd stashed a cache of weapons before the outbreak. Most of it was useless against werewolves, but buried under the dust was what I needed. A silver cross. Heavy and jagged. It could be melted down into rounds. I spent 2 days at the forge, sweating as I poured molten silver into molds. Each bullet came out rough, imperfect, but solid. By the end, I had 6. 6 chances to end this. When the next full moon rose, I followed the bond to St. Catherine's Church. That was where Grant had gathered them, his flock, as he called it. From the woods, I saw him standing where the altar once stood, his body towering over the others. His clerical collar still hung from his neck, twisted like a crown. He howled in cadences that sounded like sermons, and the pack answered with reverence. It wasn't a mob anymore. It was an army. I gripped my rifle and whispered to myself, 1 bullet, 1 shot. But the bond pulsed stronger, and for a moment I felt Grant's eyes on me, not from across the church, but from inside my own head. He knew I was there, and he welcomed me. His welcome wasn't words. It was a wave of heat rolling through the bond, thick with hunger and certainty. I felt him inside my head, tugging at the last threads of resistance, telling me I belonged. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to stop fighting, to let the pain fall away. But then I remembered the screams, the school, the church, the farmhouse, and the faces of people who never had a choice. That memory was the rope I clung to as I stepped from the trees toward the ruins of St. Catherine's. The pack parted when they saw me. Dozens of eyes burned in the dark, but none of them lunged. They sniffed the air and snarled, but they didn't strike. They knew. They could smell the curse in me, the infection crawling under my skin. To them, I wasn't prey. I was family. Grant stood at the altar, his monstrous body looming in the shattered glow of moonlight through broken glass. His eyes locked on mine, and I felt the weight of him like a storm pressing against my chest. He raised his head and howled, a sound layered with voices, as if every beast in the valley was speaking through him. The pack answered, a chorus that shook the walls until chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. Through the bond, I felt his thoughts brush against mine. You are one of us. Do not waste yourself on silver and fear. I tightened my grip on the rifle. Inside my chest, the hunger surged, begging me to lower it, to kneel, to let him claim me. My hand shook, but I forced the barrel up until it pointed at his heart. You'll never own me, I whispered. Grant laughed, a sound that echoed in both the air and my skull. His body shifted, bones stretching, claws lengthening, jaw splitting wider than a man should. But even as he transformed, I saw fragments of his old face, the priest who once baptized my niece, who blessed our town square on holidays. That twisted memory made my stomach turn. I fired. The silver round tore through the air and struck his chest. For a second, nothing happened. Then the burn spread, black veins cracking across his body like lightning through glass. His howl changed, no longer triumphant but raw, desperate. The bond between us screamed with static. I felt every werewolf in the pack stagger, their connection to him jolting like cut wires. The church erupted in chaos. Beasts clawed at the air, the howls fractured and broken. Some collapsed, writhing as if their very nerves were tearing apart. Others fled into the night, howling in confusion. Grant stumbled, dropping to one knee. I fired again. The second bullet hit higher, burning through his throat. The sound he made was part growl, part sermon, like he was trying to preach even as his body betrayed him. Through the bond, I felt something snap. Not just in him, but in all of them. The network that tied them together shattered, leaving nothing but scattered fragments. The pack that had been one mind became a mob of broken things. Grant's final howl wasn't just pain, it was fury. His body lurched toward me, even as the silver ate him alive. I braced for impact, but before he reached me, I drove the cross I carried into his chest, pushing with every ounce of strength left in me. Light seared out of him, brighter than fire, hotter than the sun. I staggered back, shielding my eyes, and when I looked again, the alpha was gone. Nothing remained but ash and the twisted metal of his melted collar. The silence that followed was heavier than any howl. Around me, the remaining wolves scattered into the forest. Without Grant's voice binding them, they were no longer an army. They were just monsters again. Dangerous, yes, but disorganized, stripped of their purpose. And then I felt it, the bond inside me breaking. The pressure that had been building for weeks dissolved, leaving me gasping. But not all of it vanished. Something stayed. I collapsed against the altar, rifle slipping from my hand. My body still throbbed with the curse, but it hadn't finished its work. My senses were sharper than ever, my hunger still gnawing. Yet my mind was mine. The bond hadn't consumed me. It had changed me. My grandfather's words from his journals came back then, words I'd skimmed and ignored as a boy. Some are cursed to walk between the two worlds. Not beast, not man. A bridge. I understood now. I wasn't a survivor. I wasn't a victim. I was something else. A bridge walker. When dawn broke, the church lay in ruins, but I was still standing. Survivors trickled in from the hills, cautious, wide-eyed, whispering about the sudden silence of the pack. They saw me with ash on my hands and yellow still flickering faintly in my eyes. Some backed away in fear. Others dropped to their knees, whispering thanks. The government came weeks later, sealing Thornfield off with fences and warnings about a chemical outbreak. They didn't want the truth leaking out. Let them hide it. They weren't the ones who had listened to their neighbors' screams. I stayed. I had no choice. The curse still lived in me, and I could feel the pull of others like me in the distance. Werewolves still prowled the wild places, solitary now, but alive. And I knew the darkness that had used Grant wasn't gone. It was waiting. So I hunt, night after night. I move through the valleys and forests, tracking the yellow eyes that dare to shine under the moon. I use the hunger inside me as a weapon, a compass pointing to the things that need killing. I'm not fully human anymore, but I'm not theirs either. I'm the line between them and the rest of you. Remember Thornfield County. Remember what was lost here. And if you ever hear voices calling your name from the dark, don't answer. Don't look back, because the curse isn't dead, and I'm not done fighting.